This is The Download from Sounds Profitable, your daily source for the essential news in the business of podcasting, brought to you by Spreaker from iHeart. I'm Gavin Gaddis, in for Tom Webster. Here's what you need to know for today, Monday, April 1st. And to cut the tension, no, we're not doing any April Fool's jokes today, but we are going to have a special section recapping a few that we've found. But before we get to the news proper, a quick reminder that the webinar debuting our latest study, The Ad Bargain, is this Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Registration is free, link in the show notes. We'd love to see you there. Up first, Shortcuts, Shenanigans, and Real Audience Growth by Dan Meisner. Last week, Bloomberg covered the existence of Mopod and their tools that deliver Apple Podcast followers through tactics like mobile game ad placement and incentivized clicks. Meisner points to a sentiment from Casey Newton. Anyone can get traffic, but it's hard to build an audience. To put products like Mopods into perspective, an analog equivalent would be a new restaurant spending a boatload on mailing 2-for-1 flyers to local residents. The campaign would get people in the door, but if the restaurant itself sucks, the increased foot traffic they bought won't translate to monetizable clientele. Up next, how the New York Times is using visuals to boost podcast discovery and grow listenership. According to Nisa Lassam, VP of Business and Head of Audience Growth for Audio at the New York Times, the current strategy is to promote its podcast through cross-promotion within their own network and marketing in the core New York Times News app. The New York Times audio app operates as a test bed where writers can experiment with audio format that might not necessitate a full RSS release as a podcast. Lassam attributes NYT's consistent listenership growth to writers promoting their content on social media, a focus on consistent weekly content, and regularly debuting new programs. Up next, YouTube to host Creator Workshop. This last Friday at Evolutions by Podcast Movement, YouTube announced a series of free webinar workshops. The first installment, YouTube Podcasting 101, is set for Friday, April 26th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The session will be hosted by YouTube Strategic Media Partner in Podcasts, Stephanie Chan, and Global Product Activation Manager, Music and Podcasts, Emma Sweet. Joe Rogan hosted musician Gary Clark Jr. on his podcast, and the blues artist's streams on Spotify shot up 500% among Rogan listeners. Recently, Gary Clark Jr. became the first musician to guest on the Joe Rogan Experience and play a song live in the studio. While the exposure bump from appearing on the podcast is nothing new, Clark Jr.'s Spotify stats show in the 3 days following the episode's release, streams jumped 180% in the US and 150% globally. The Joe Rogan Experience is a particularly extreme case of this, given the show's size, but it does serve as a reminder that podcasts are good at mobilizing audiences. Up next, podcasters explore diverse revenue streams in a bid for growth. A thorough dive into various revenue streams in podcasting. Podcasting as an industry continues to grow, outpacing growth trends for overall internet ads, according to the IAB's U.S. Podcast Advertising Revenue Study from 2023. The article covers streaming ads, paid podcast subscriptions, merchandise, and incorporating video workflow for better discovery. As for the rest of the news, one current and 2 former presidents appeared on SmartLess in the lead-up to a New York campaign fundraiser. Edison Research debuted the latest edition of the Infinite Dial study. The Hollywood Reporter covers Wondery's genre-defying podcast marketing plans. A super PAC, that's Political Action Committee, affiliated with Senator Ted Cruz, reports receiving $215,000 in digital revenue from iHeartMedia. Cruz's staff has previously claimed he does not receive financial benefit from the iHeart-produced Verdict with Ted Cruz. And Variety covers Jackass creators Johnny Knoxville's first podcast, Pretty Sure I Can Fly, produced by SmartLess Media, Campside, and Amplify Pictures. And finally, the April Fool's Roundup I promised earlier. First up, Spotify posted a billboard for a fictional dating service dubbed Spotify Matched, which is a audio-first dating app, according to the billboard. Jar Audio announced they're ditching RSS feed podcast distribution in exchange for Cassette Cast, a bi-weekly tape delivery service that costs just $4.99 per episode, shipping 1 cassette tape per episode. And before you ask, yes, 6-hour episodes would not fit on a cassette tape, and that's why these cassettes are 400% larger than the standard. And finally, Accu Radio has announced a new user interface involving hand gestures given to cameras. which includes sticking fingers in one's ears to turn down volume or skipping around the room to skip a song. Be sure to check out all the links to every article mentioned right in your podcast listening app or at soundsprofitable.com, where you can also subscribe to the newsletter version. The download is written and produced by Brian Barletta, myself, and Tom Webster. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Download us tomorrow.